Commodore fans, are you ready? It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast on the 440 Sports Network. Keep it locked right here for the best Vanderbilt coverage. Whether it's Clark Lee on the gridiron, Mark Byington and Shea Ralph on the hardwood, or Tim Corbin on the diamond, the Vandy247 crew has you covered. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Also, like this video and subscribe to the YouTube channel. That's free and easy to do. Follow the crew on Twitter, Apple Podcast, and Spotify for podcast episodes. Lastly, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. And now, pull up a chair. It's time for another episode of the Vandy247 podcast.
Welcome back into Vandy247 Live. I'm your host, Billy Derrick, on a beautiful Monday morning in Nashville, Tennessee. Had great weather yesterday, 53 degrees currently here in Nashville. But knowing the SEC tournament gods, it'll get freezing Wednesday through Friday, probably here in Nashville. But speaking of that SEC tournament, we're going to talk all about that today with Blake Lovell from Southeastern 16. Does a really good job, probably the best SEC basketball guru, at least here regionally, definitely here in Nashville. So looking forward to talking to him about this week's tournament and where Vanderbilt stands right now and their potential in both this tournament and in March Madness as well. Before we do all that, though, I want to tell you about the Wash House. They present our basketball coverage. Are you dreading laundry days? It's the only time to do the things you truly enjoy. Well, let the professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 locations in Nashville. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh, and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. Well, today, we're talking all things SEC basketball tournament with Mr. Blake Lovell from Southeastern 16. Blake, how you doing?
Hello, Billy. Good to talk to you as always. Yeah, the tournament's here. This is, I'd say it's the one where we've been waiting for, but the next one is probably the one we're really waiting for. But this is going to be a fun tournament, I think, this week in Nashville. So,
well, you say the next one is the one we've been waiting for. I think this year is, could be. It's not more important, of course, but I mean, this is the best the SEC has ever been, Blake. You know that. And the best league probably ever in college basketball. Have you ever been more excited for an SEC basketball tournament?
I know, and I think it's going to be interesting too, right? Because we look at these teams that are on the bubble, which I think there are fewer of those now than we thought there would be maybe. Because, I do think Vanderbilt and Georgia have kind of put themselves in a position where I don't see them playing their way out. Arkansas may be still a little bit iffy, but I think they're going to wind up getting in. And so, you've got those storylines, but then it's like Auburn's the number 1 overall seed. They've lost 2 games in a row. Florida feels like the team maybe that's playing the best right now. Alabama comes back into the mix, and everyone wanted to write them off just like we did last year at this time. And all of a sudden they go win at Auburn. Tennessee playing well. I mean, Kentucky's about as at full strength as they're going to get. There are like so many things here to where I think, we may look at this and say, well, there may seem like 1 or 2 obvious winners. I'm not convinced based on, understanding that there are a lot of good teams in this conference, as we said. And I think you're probably looking at maybe 6 teams or so who could win this thing this week.
I want to start with Vandy. We'll get more into the SEC as a whole here a little bit later. Look, you're in Nashville, Blake, right? You've followed Vanderbilt. You've kept up. I mean, the last 6, 7, 8 years just have not been Vanderbilt basketball we know it can be. Other than some blips on the radar there, a couple of years ago they made a push, and then they're under Bryce Drew. But they're the 12 seed in the SEC tournament, looking at potentially a 9 seed in the SEC in the NCAA tournament. That tells you how tough the SEC is. But what has impressed you most about? I know they've lost their last 2, but God forbid they're playing 2 desperate teams that had to win those games when you're looking at it. So I don't think we can kick them while they're down too much right now. But how do you look at what they've done this year and what has impressed you most about Coach Byington's job?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like you said, they've been a team that has exceeded expectations. I mean, even, Max and I were last summer, we were pumping up Vanderbilt. We were like, hey, why is no one talking about them? Like, we can see a path there. Like, we think they could be the sleeper in the SEC. And then we eventually talked ourselves out of it. We're like, all right, I don't know. Like, the size, all that kind of stuff, right? The same stuff that everybody's talked about all year when the questions that people had coming into SEC play. But then I'm like, I look at the way they play, and I think the discipline and the way they execute is not something that's like going to be measured on a Ken Palm necessarily. I mean, you can measure it through certain stats, but like, there's not a discipline. There's not an execution stat. Like, I just think that, to me, is the thing that always puts them in a position to win games. And, you can't say that for everyone, where some teams maybe do just get by with their talent, right? And they don't have to always be perfect at executing the game plan. They're just simply more skilled. And I think with Vanderbilt, you're looking at a roster that there are a lot of very skilled players on the roster, but it's why they were picked where they were in the preseason, right? Is what people mostly look at the roster and say, all right, how do I compare, player 1, player 2, player 3, player 4, player 5 to the other guys on the team in that same spot? And, that's why you had Alabama 1 and Auburn 2 and whatever the order wound up being. So I think the fact is he has gotten the most out of his roster to where, like, you have guys that are, in absolute starring type roles, and it's a team. Like, it's not just one or two guys. Like, it's the whole thing that they put together here, where I think it's seeing that they are the kind of team that, to me, I wouldn't want to see in a tournament type play, because I've seen the teams they can beat. I've seen what they've done, against Tennessee and Kentucky and A&M and Missouri and Ole Miss and so forth. I mean, even games they lost. Like, let's not take anything away from them in some of those games. And so I just feel like they've done such a good job of implementing their game plan. They're playing the way that Mark Byington has always played when his teams have been successful. And to me, like, sometimes it's really that easy when it comes to being successful, in college basketball.
So they've dropped 2 straight here. They hosted Arkansas on Tuesday. That was probably one of their worst played games of the season. Didn't feel like they came out with the same energy they typically come out with. And Arkansas jumping out of the gym with Trevon Brazile, they get that win. And then Georgia in Athens. Georgia, I mean, those are 2 desperate teams. Like, so how do you look at these last couple of games, especially considering the 3 games before that? Vanderbilt beat Ole Miss at home, a ranked team, and then 2 straight top 15 teams in Texas A&M and Missouri. So how do you look at these last 2? Are you saying, look, those were 2 desperate teams? Are you saying, hey, Vanderbilt, I think we've realized some more weaknesses here? Like, how do you look at these last couple?
What we saw went out in the SEC in the last couple of weeks was motivation. Like, yeah. And I wish I would have had one of those, the meme out there of, like, the board, just connecting all the different dots, right? And just trying to figure out all the SEC teams that won, that had to win. Like, they had to win those kind of games. And I feel like that was what was really the story. Again, Arkansas, coming off of that performance against South Carolina, they had to win at Vanderbilt. They didn't have a choice, because then at that point, we probably would be sitting here saying, all right, Arkansas is probably still a little bit out. But now they're in. And because they won the game at Vanderbilt, they beat Mississippi State, they're in. And then you look at some of these other teams, right? It is, to me, it's like it's really not that much different than where Vanderbilt was whenever they were in a position where they had to win some games. And they did it. They won 3 in a row. They win at Texas A&M, and they come back and beat Missouri against all odds, it seemed like, towards the end of that game. And so everybody did that. Georgia did that. Oklahoma even won a game to keep themselves back in the conference. They won 2 games. I mean, they beat Missouri, then they beat Texas. And, like, even for Texas, winning that game at Mississippi State, now they're still out of the picture right now probably, but even by winning that game at Mississippi State, they're still right there with a chance. And so I think that's really what won out in the SEC over these past couple of weeks, not just with, the bubble teams, but even some of the teams that needed to get wins to feel like they were playing better, like Ole Miss, Alabama. Yeah. We talked about them. Everybody was ready to write off Alabama, losing 4 or 6. But, like, teams like that got wins to feel a little bit better about themselves heading into this tournament. Mississippi State, I think, was another example. Like, they lose 4 or 5 to finish the season, but they got a good win at home against Texas A&M before that. Just winning the game against, LSU gives you a little bit of confidence. And so it's those kind of things. And so I don't really put a lot of stock necessarily into the final week of the regular season. I'm not saying that applies every year, but I think in this particular instance for Vanderbilt, I don't really see it as much more as, they were playing two teams that were probably a little bit more desperate than they were, and just happened to be, the kind of team that could beat them on that night. So,
yeah, and man, Arkansas, so long and athletic, and Georgia is as well. I mean, they've got 4 guys down low that
great defensive
they
teams too, Billy. I mean, think about that. Like those two teams, I don't think have gotten enough credit this year. Arkansas is almost a top 15 defensive team in the country, and that would surprise anyone maybe if you followed Arkansas the entire year. Georgia's top 25 in defense, and so I think that's something too to kind of think about what those teams can do defensively, and they also just happen to find a rhythm offensively here down the stretch too. So
yeah. All right, the age-old question of does the SEC tournament matter? I feel like every year we say, yeah, it'll matter. It's really good this year. It's a great league, and maybe it does to a degree. Like if Oklahoma makes some crazy run, or UC and Arkansas make a run, which they're probably already in still. But for Vanderbilt specifically, they're a 9 seed right now, pretty much universally. How much can they improve their seeding in the SEC tournament, Blake?
I mean, my opinion is not much. Because like you said, I mean, we see this every year, and sometimes we try to trick ourselves into thinking it's going to matter. And the committee has just told us time and time again that they don't really, I mean, every committee is different. Let me say that up front, but they don't really seem to care about 1 or 2 games in a conference tournament setting. They're looking at the full body of work. And so, you're not probably jumping up a seed line or anything like that. Now, look, if they were to make a run to Saturday or Sunday or whatever, right, could that maybe be significant enough to move them up a seed? It's possible because, too, we have to think about it. And some years, it works out that way. You're not just thinking about how you're going to move your seeding. It may just be a matter of, okay, well, this team in front of you, lost to somebody that's, 150 in the net or something like that, and maybe, okay, the committee decided, we got to move them down a little bit. And so all those things have to matter kind of around you, but I just don't really think it's going to matter much except for potentially, like I said, Oklahoma and Texas to me are the 2 teams that this tournament will matter for, just because they are right there squarely on the bubble, it seems. And I think they're the ones that have the most to gain just for that reason. I mean, if Arkansas loses to South Carolina, is there a scenario where Arkansas gets left out? If there are enough bid stealers, maybe, but I doubt it. I doubt it. Like, it's highly unlikely in my opinion. Because let's call it what it is too. Putting Arkansas and John Calipari in Dayton in the first 4, they're not going to vote against that, is my opinion. So if they were to put Arkansas in that spot, I don't think they're getting jumped by someone else, unless there are just maybe an unprecedented amount of bid stealers out there, right? So I don't think the tournament matters, and that gets into a bigger discussion, Billy, which I've had many times over the past couple of weeks. There are some people who think I'm crazy when I say that I'm not saying the team should lose a game this week, but, like, if you're Auburn, you just really don't have anything to gain here like this way. I mean, yes, you get to gain another conference championship. And you know what? I said that 2 weeks ago about Auburn. Now that they're coming off back-to-back losses, maybe it's a little different because you're like, okay, they don't have anything to gain seeding-wise, but maybe they just want to play better, and that's okay. But for a lot of SEC teams, I don't think their seeding is going to be impacted by this tournament because we've seen it year after year. For the most part, it never is. So.
Well, and for Vandy fans, we've got a comment here. They should lose to Texas to get a 10 seed instead of an 8-9 seed. That's pretty commonly believed by Vanderbilt fans. I don't think they'd be, distraught if they lose to Texas, but they may not even move back to a 10 even if they do lose to Texas. So you just don't know. Like, you can't. Good luck rooting for anything like that because number one, you don't know, and number two, you may not move at all.
No, and I think it was, what was it? Jay Billis may have said it on Saturday on the Game Day show. I think he said, play to win. It's okay if you lose. Like, that's kind of the thing, I feel like, for a lot of teams this week. It's just, except for Oklahoma and Texas probably, and Arkansas probably needs to win the first one just to feel completely confident. But that should be the approach. And that's where, you know what? I don't know that coaches are going to go out and just completely mess up their rotations just for the sake of trying to prevent injuries and all this other stuff, because you can't do that. I mean, that's just you're maybe putting your team in a worse spot if you do. But with Vanderbilt, you can look at it two ways, right? Yes, you could, let's try to lose and let's get the 10 seed and stay away from the 1 seeds. That sounds great. Or you could say, well, hey, let's play in the 8-9 game. Let's go play UConn. And let's be the team, that prevents them from winning a third straight national championship. Everybody's going to be talking about Vanderbilt as the team that knocked out UConn. They stopped this, the dynasty in the making or whatever. So that's something too. And I mean, hey, I get it. Like, you look at all the brackets, Vanderbilt's out there with UConn and Duke, and I mean, you're back in the NCAA tournament. Like, hey, why wouldn't you want to play? Those are big time storyline type games that get you a lot of visibility, right? So, not the worst thing.
Blake, last thing on Vandy, how do you think Texas comes out here? That's probably the biggest mystery here of this tournament. Like, how does Texas? They're good enough to make a run, but there's some potential give up factor here, like big time for Texas, and I'm interested to see how they come out. You may not be able to answer, but how do you think they come out, and how do you think they match up with Vandy for a second time on a neutral floor?
Yeah, I mean, that is the big question. I mean, they have Trey Johnson, and from Vandy's perspective, I'd probably not be thrilled with the fact that he just went, 0 of 14 from the floor against Oklahoma. Yep. Worst game of the season for Trey Johnson, and now, I do not have a degree from Vanderbilt in any mathematical equation, but the probability tells me that he's probably going to have a pretty good game the next time out. So I think that's probably not something you wanted to see him have those kind of struggles against Oklahoma. But I just think with Texas, like you said, you don't really know what you're getting. I will say maybe, though, a little bit in defense of them. I mean, they've lost some close games this season, and they've been right there against not everybody, but in quite a few of these games, they've been right there with a chance. And, obviously that applies to the Vanderbilt game the first time around. And to me, this is kind of one where I feel like we talked about sort of the execution of a Vanderbilt and the way they've executed theirs. I feel like Texas can be the opposite sometimes. Like, they just are not a team that you feel like you can trust to maybe execute exactly the way they need to, other than just saying, all right, let's see if Trey Johnson can put us on his back and make it happen. And so I think that's going to be probably the biggest story here, because, again, like you said, they're talented enough Texas is talented enough to get to Saturday. But their front court has been a little inconsistent. Really could say they've been inconsistent overall outside of Trey Johnson. And so I think it's really hard to know exactly what you're going to get from them. And I don't feel like they have that just one thing that just completely defines what they are, right? We said we could pick a couple things for Vanderbilt, but
right.
I don't know what that is for Texas. Like, again, other than just mentioning one player, I don't know what that thing is that just completely defines them and says that's where they're going to have the statistical advantage on everybody, is in that area. I don't really know that there is anything. So,
all right, last thing here, Blake. SEC tournament coming up Wednesday. We got 4 games each day. Who's your pick to click? I mean, are you going chalk? I know you mentioned Auburn.
I know
how they may lose, and that'll be okay, right? So are you looking at a Florida and Alabama, maybe even a Tennessee to win this thing?
Here's what's interesting, Billy. I put together the numbers on this, and someone pointed out as soon as the bracket was revealed, and I'm like, this is fascinating. So the average scoring defense for the top 4 teams in the bracket: Auburn, Tennessee, Texas A&M, Ole Miss. Those teams are allowing only 67.6 points per game this season. The average scoring offense of the bottom 4 teams in the bracket, 86.5 points per game. Like, we're talking pretty much almost a 20-point difference in scoring and defending. And again, not to say, like, you obviously have teams like Auburn and Florida who are good everywhere, right? But you see a drastic difference from the top and the bottom. And so I think, here's my theory, I think the teams at the top are going to beat each other up in physical, free throw laden games potentially. I think the teams at the bottom, not to say there won't be free throws. Missouri and Alabama love to shoot a lot of free throws. But I just wonder kind of stylistically how that plays out this week, right? So I tend to believe that the teams at the bottom, I don't want to say have the best chance, But I think there is one where, like, we know the upside of all four of those teams there at the bottom with Florida, Alabama, Kentucky, Missouri.
Yep.
And I'm like, if you let one of them get hot, who's going to stop them? You know? And I think that's where I love to get those matchups in particular, right? I can say that because Vanderbilt's not in the bottom part, so I don't have to, hold that back. I can say I hope we get Florida, Missouri, Alabama, Kentucky, because to me, my thinking is the winner comes out of that part of the bracket. And so, to be honest, though, it's hard to pick against Florida right now. I just think that they're the best team at this moment. I think they're playing the best of any of the other SEC teams. And I would probably pick Florida right now, even though Auburn has the better resume. There's no question, all that. But I think Florida's playing the best right now.
Can't wait. Can't wait. The best time of the year. Looking forward to the SEC tournament and obviously what Vanderbilt does. And then if they win on Wednesday, they'll await Texas A&M and then a potential Vandy-Tennessee matchup, the second game of the day on Friday. How fun would that be there in Nashville? So looking forward to it. Blake, good luck this week. Hopefully you survive. Hopefully all of us survive who cover college basketball this week and really the next month. But really appreciate you taking the time.
Sounds good, Billy. Looking forward to seeing you. Thanks.
All right, that's Blake Lovell from Southeastern 16. Does a phenomenal job covering SEC basketball. Really here regional, I think he's one of the best. I think he does a great job. And the top part of that bracket that Vanderbilt's a part of, those top four teams, very low-scoring games. They don't give up a ton on the defensive end, so it's going to be tough for Vanderbilt if they advance after beating Texas to play Texas A&M, but could set up a Vandy-Tennessee matchup there on Friday. And then, of course, you got all the night slate games as well. But just to reiterate, Vanderbilt, Texas, approximately 2:30 on Wednesday. It'll probably be closer to 3 o'clock if we're being real. Probably closer to 3 o'clock, Texas and Vandy. Commodore's got the 12 seed, Texas the 13. They win, they'll play 5 seed Texas in the second game of the day there on Thursday. They're in the second game of the day slot. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, if they keep winning. And then you got the semis on Saturday and then the championship on Sunday. Just such a great week, though. The SEC tournament here in Nashville. Cannot wait to be going down there to Birdstone. All right, so that's what we got for basketball. Of course, we do have the women's basketball selection show. And why am I mistaken? They haven't had that yet. I need to get Elena on. Selection show. Okay, so they have not had it yet, but we'll await Vanderbilt's women's seed as well. Just to reiterate, also mentioned the baseball at the top of the show. They sweep Xavier. They get a win on Friday, 15-3 in 7 innings. Brody Johnston have a weekend. He had a walk-off run rule grand slam for Brody Johnson there on Friday against the Musketeers. And then Saturday, I was here for a lot of this one. They beat Xavier 6-1. They scored 5 runs in the 9th, I think it was. Had a 2 RBI suicide squeeze, which was the epitome of Vanderbilt baseball. And then they win yesterday over Xavier 4-0. So that's a good series sweep over a good Xavier team. A pretty good Xavier team at that. Vanderbilt has all of a sudden won 4 straight games, getting their confidence back. And they will have one midweek game this week. That's tomorrow against Valparaiso at 4:30 before traveling down to Auburn, Alabama to play the 22nd ranked Auburn Tigers. They'll play Friday at 6 o'clock, Saturday night at 6, and then Sunday at 2 o'clock. So again, good series win for the VandyBoys as they get back on track. All right, tomorrow, don't think we'll have a Real Deal podcast. Probably going to try to get Joey and maybe even Robbie on to continue to talk about this SEC tournament, preview Vandy's matchup with Texas, and maybe talk a little bit of baseball as well. But all kinds of basketball talk coming the rest of this week. Keep it locked in right here to Vandy247.com. This podcast has always been free. We want it to stay that way. Here's how you can help keep it that way. Give us a review and a 5-star rating. That helps us get noticed. If you're listening and haven't subscribed to Vandy247.com yet, please do. We have special offers all over the place there on Vandy 24/7. Limited time, $1 VIP membership right now. You can get daily insights on the latest scoop on all things Vanderbilt with that deal. So go do that now. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel, like this video, give us a comment. That's free. And finally, if you're interested in sponsoring the show, football season coming up, football sponsor, come on down. Email Chris Lee at chrislee70@gmail.com. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you again soon with more episodes of the Vandy 247 podcast.